Hi, my name is Zachary Lyman. I'm an incoming freshman in the fall of 2020, and these videos are a opportunity for me not only to meet the professors, but also to kind of showcase their personalities, not only just as teachers, but also as individuals who will be getting to know in the coming years. And so, Dr. Distel, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very good. We're going to start off with just some kind of academic questions, going over, kind of what your courses are going to be like, and then we're going to kind of move into personal territory about you as an individual and as a professor.
Sounds great.
One thing I remember when I got the opportunity to sit in on one of your classes in high school was you were working on research it was checking the effects of bug spray on the rest of the environment. And I'm just curious to hear some follow up on what happened there.
That's an interesting one. So when you sat in with us, the first trial we did with that study was sort of coming up right around then. We were looking at a group of students was looking at the effects of bug foggers, so mosquito foggers that you would fog up like a whole yard or a whole swimming pool area or something like that. But these were the kind that you would use for home use rather than industrial use. And they wanted to find out how effective those foggers were against native insects that might be non-target kinds of insects. And so what they did was set out jars with native dragonfly larvae. Dragonfly larvae are aquatic. So they set out jars with water in them in a big array, and then they were staggered. So some of them were spaced like a meter apart or 2 meters apart, all the way out to about 20 meters away from the point that the fogging application happened. So we set this up a couple of times because the first time they set it up, we fogged right along the first row, and then we let the fog settle overnight. And when the students came back in the morning, there had been a windstorm and a bunch of the jars had gotten knocked over. This is what you learn when you try new things. So we came back and tried it again about, I don't know, a week or so later. And this time they had set it up with like pegs in the ground to help hold the jars and keep them steady. And of course, we cover the jars with like a screen, like window screen, so that if an animal like a raccoon or a skunk came along, it wouldn't be able to disrupt the bugs that were inside, but it also wouldn't be able to pick up any toxins that might have gotten into the water. And so they found really kind of a surprising effect the second time, which was that immediately close to where the fogger went, those bugs died off very effectively. But even out to like 2 meters away, and you expect these foggers to cover much larger areas, up to about 2 meters away, didn't seem to have any effect. So on the one hand, that was good for native aquatic insects because it seems like the students found probably not a big effect of the chemicals that are in the can on those aquatic insects. Probably not so good because if people find that their insecticide application is not having an effect or not the effect that they want to, a lot of times folks will just try more insecticide or adding a new insecticide with it or something like that. So the ecotoxicological effects were interesting, but the application effects probably kind of dangerous.
But yeah, that's really cool to hear, like how that finished, because that was something I was really curious about. I was like, oh, I wonder how that turned out.
Yeah, it's always cool to see. So in a lot of my upper level biology classes, we have a lab section to them. And in all of the ones that I teach, that lab section involves students doing their own original research in groups, usually. It's really important to me that students who graduate with a degree in science from Schreiner graduate having done science, having gone through the planning and the design of a scientific experiment, having gone through the struggles of seeing, like what we just talked about, seeing like you think you've got a great array set up, a great plan set up, and a windstorm comes along and you didn't expect that. And how does that affect the way that you collect data. These are the things that real scientists, professional scientists deal with all the time. What are the things I didn't anticipate that change my ability to collect the data that I hope to collect? So you modify, you tweak it, you get it right so you can collect the data you hope to collect. And that learning experience is critical for students. And then, of course, seeing it through, taking the data that they collect, analyzing those data, and learning to communicate those data are part of the class as well. Very often, those class projects will turn into one or more presentations in a larger venue. Almost all of them get presented at our Student Achievement Showcase, either as a talk or as a poster. And we've taken several of them to the Texas Academy of Science annual meeting. Students present their work there, either again as a talk or a poster. In fact, this past spring, in end of February, I took a student who's been working with me for a long time, Ashley Ray, her work on the effects of an invasive plant called chinaberry on native, mostly dragonfly larvae, but a few other things, native aquatic invertebrates. And she got an award. She was top student to present in her section. So that was really exciting for her and for Schreiner to be able to celebrate in that way in a public forum with scientists from all over Texas.
Yeah, I like that you put an emphasis on research and real world experience so that students have something to take and put on top of their book smarts.
I think it's really important because so often, and this happened a little bit to me, but I saw it happen to many of my peers who were in college at other schools at the same time. It's easy to learn in college about how other people have done science. And don't get me wrong, that's important. But going through the experience yourself, even if it's not on a project that you feel a particular calling toward, going through the practice of science is huge. It's absolutely critical to understand how science works.
On top of learning how to do science and how to do real research, what are some other life lessons that you'd like students to take from your classes?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's important to see that science does not always go smoothly. In the news or in scientific publications, we often see the results. We maybe even see a clear picture of the design and the methodology. What we don't see are the hiccups and those iterations or previous versions that scientists struggled with. That the jars fell over, or the shipment of yeast that they were going to work with was infected with bacteria or whatever. So they had to make some adjustments before they could actually start collecting the data they hoped to. That's important to me. Communication is very important to me. I think that one of the beauties of taking science classes at a liberal arts school is that you see the great diversity of factors that affect how science works, and similarly how science affects these other disciplines. They don't all work as discrete disciplines in their own silos. They all work together. You can't be a scientist in America and not know how to pay your taxes or how to communicate with people around you. So knowing how all those things work together is really critical. But I tell students in most of my classes that that communication is probably, of any one skill that you could take away, communication is probably the most important one. Because you can be really, really smart about scientific facts and processes, but if you can't communicate to others that you understand or how you understand, that doesn't take you very far. Even as far as getting a degree, you need to be able to communicate what you know. The other big takeaway I would say is that there's a bit of an adjustment, perhaps for some folks a very big adjustment, in transitioning from high school to learning in college. And I will say that learning doesn't happen to you, it happens because of you. You've got to take away this idea that teachers or professors are there to provide information, and that information is fixed, and that you are to somehow absorb it. It doesn't work that way. In college, your professors are your resources. We are not paid, we are not expected by you or by your parents or by our bosses to be there as the source of information. We know you can get most of the facts online. We're there to help you understand what those facts mean, how to use them in context, how to use them in new situations, how to understand what challenging situations look like, how to balance the evidence of one thing versus another, how to weigh the quality of different sources in a practical scenario. So I think the thing that students can do that's most effective for them, where their professors are concerned, is ask questions. Any question that comes to you about what you are, about the topic or about the presentation of how you're interacting with your professor, ask that professor. We're here, we want to help you to learn. We want to help you find the ways that you learn best, and we want to help you integrate the stuff that you're learning in our classes with the stuff that's happening all around you.
What is the way you prefer for students to reach out when they need help or when they have questions?
That's a great question. It's different for everybody. I don't, for my own self, that I don't think matters nearly as much as what's most comfortable for the student. If you want to see me after class, great, we can do that. If you want to set up an appointment sometime outside of regular class hours or not right after or before class, that's fine too. I can answer questions by email. We can meet on webcam. We can do a Teams meeting or Skype or some other video chat. We can meet in my office. We can meet at the picnic tables outside. We can meet in the library. I'm really very flexible because I want the student to feel comfortable and empowered to ask the questions that they really need the answers to.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I really like the you're flexible. I can see that being really helpful in the future with with COVID and things being jumping through new hoops. That's going to be an important quality.
It is, and I think we need to be, students and faculty and parents and everybody who's involved in this entire enterprise need to be adaptable and flexible about what could happen. I was just on the phone with a student right before this meeting, and we were talking about some of the possibilities that could happen with COVID over the fall semester, and the anticipation that our classes are going to be face to face and fully online. But if the governor says no, we can't have classes, what do we do then? Or if a student gets sick and has been exposed to COVID and has to quarantine, what do we do then? Or if a faculty member has been exposed and has to quarantine, what do we do then? In many cases, we are really doing our very best to troubleshoot and anticipate all the possible scenarios. But if we've learned anything from the last few months, it's that there are going to be some things we did not predict, and we simply need to be ready to be adaptable to handle those situations.
Right. Yeah, and that ties just back into, how science happens. It's something that, it's a big puzzle, and you got to figure out all these different variables that you didn't necessarily anticipate at first.
I think that can be true in a lot of aspects of science. And I guess perhaps this comes back to a previous question that you asked. What are some of the takeaways from my classes? I think there's one thing that I try to encourage students to understand: a distinction between science and STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math. I think people have used those terms interchangeably when in fact they're not appropriately used interchangeably. Sometimes they can be used interchangeably. But people use the word science too often when they mean STEM. And so science is a portion of STEM, and it has its own merits, but it certainly doesn't do everything that STEM can do. So if you take the example of a puzzle, a complex scenario, complex scenarios can be addressed sometimes with math and have no real science involved, or can be addressed with engineering and have no real science involved. Science is a number of things, but at its core, it's a way to answer questions. It's not the only way to answer questions. So when we talk about science, to me, often science is beautifully simple because it has very specific parameters about how we go through the process of answering questions. There may be a lot of technology involved, there may be math involved, and some of those things may be complex and maybe feel a whole lot like a puzzle with pieces that we need to fill in. But the process of science itself is really quite elegant and streamlined. And to me, the more exciting aspect that is puzzle-like is all the possible answers that are out there that we could get from science.
So in all your research, what is a finding that you've thought was the most interesting?
Oh, goodness. That's a tough one.
I'm sure there's a lot of really fascinating.
um, one of the biggest questions that still remains from the research I've done with students, and I'll preface this with almost all of my research is done with students, has to do with a fish species that's invasive in Texas and invasive in other parts of the world as well. It's called the armored catfish or suckermouth catfish or Plecostomus. And there are several spring-fed streams in Texas where people have released their pets, these pet Plecostomus, and they've formed breeding populations. So we're trying to understand some of the ecological effects that they have on native species. And we were the first in the world to do some experiments with tadpoles, native tadpoles, to find out whether these fish could be detrimental to amphibians, because amphibians are, as a broad group, are imperiled. They're disappearing faster than any other terrestrial vertebrate group in the world. So understanding the threats to amphibians is really important and has been a core of a lot of the research that I've done. So we did a series of experiments with these armored catfish and amphibians, and we found that when tadpoles are raised in the presence of armored catfish, they almost always die. But unlike almost every other study that's ever been done with invasive fish, they didn't die because the fish were eating them. Even fish that are apparently herbivorous, will sometimes eat tadpoles. They're slow. Frankly, they're not that smart, and they can get gobbled up pretty easily. So we were really surprised because we'd raise tadpoles with these fish, and the tadpoles would die, but they'd still be in the containers. They wouldn't be consumed by the fish even after they were dead. So we're not sure what's causing the death. It remains one of the bigger mysteries of what we've worked on. We were able to publish those results, and I've got a group of student authors that published those in the journal BIOS in 2017. And we've done some related studies in the time since then, but we still have not been able to answer that question.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover? Because I know we're getting close to our time limit, but if there's anything that you wanted to discuss in further detail, then.
Well, I'll just say that regarding my classes specifically, I look forward to meeting you in my classes and all the other folks who are coming in. Adaptability is going to be huge in this time of the COVID pandemic, but my classes generally try to steer away from just fact kind of delivery. I really prefer a discussion style course. So if you come into my class waiting for the information, then you'll probably spend a lot of time feeling like things are happening around you. But if you come into my class with a little bit of background reading done and some questions, then we're going to be able to have a big discussion and talk about the things that you found questionable, the things you didn't understand. You'll hear what other people didn't understand, and that may click in as something that you didn't realize you didn't understand. And we can see how different people's backgrounds and different perspectives in learning work together to build a better collective understanding of biological processes. I like to use a lot of activities. I use a lot of group presentations where the students present on a particular topic, because you never learn something as well as when you teach it. And so rather than having the students listen to me talk, it's way more effective for them to see their peers talk and for them themselves to really dive deep on a particular topic and teach it. Then, of course, you learn about other things like your presentation style. What are your skills in terms of oral presentation or building a successful PowerPoint? How good are you at answering questions? And what does that mean about how effective you are at knowing the information? So I use a diversity of different approaches in my classes. So I guess the take home there is that you should not expect to just sit and listen in my classes. I do want to show you one thing real quick. I had forgotten. The reason I put this campus map up is that I want to just show you where the field station is really quickly, because that's a wonderful benefit that we have at Schreiner University. We have a 33-acre biological field station. So here's the majority of campus. But if you go out, let's see, past the baseball and softball fields, East Main Street is out there, and just across the street is this more wooded area, and that is our field station. We have a dedicated field biology lab out there. We have a shared classroom space, and we have our astronomy observatory out there as well as a solar panel array that helps power that facility and part of campus. So we have lots of cool stuff going on, a diversity of habitats out there that I take students to and Dr. Caesar takes students to sample wildlife or different ecosystem processes. It's just a really exciting place to be and one of my favorite places to spend time with students.